Welcome to Jump Shots from the Goal Line. I am Jonathan Dugan. I am joined by, as always, by Jonathan Henningsen. John, what's up, dude? How are you on this crazy, crazy sports day?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it, right? It's a crazy, crazy day. So I know I've been probably texting you and messaging you from the beginning of the day because in our world, everything is happening. Whether it was, it started with college football, right? And we jump right into that. And I'm like, wait, schools are leaving the Pac-12 and it's USC and UCLA. And then, it's all of probably 45 minutes to an hour later and KD's demanding a trade. So, I'm sure you worked today. I did my best. There's a lot going on in the sports world. And honestly, I was really sucked into it.
Yeah, dude, it kind of sucks because honestly, I'm really, really busy at work right now. And it's so hard to be like trying to be focused and productive at work. And then my phone literally is just buzzing off the hook because I obviously have like on Twitter, you can set your like alerts to if Waj tweets out or if, so-and-so tweets out. And it just kept coming and coming and coming and coming. And then obviously like the Pac-12 stuff, like everything just happened at once. It was just a sports nuclear bomb. And you know what? I'm here for it. I freaking love it. This is what the offseason is about. And let me tell you, couldn't come at a better time because other than that, all we have is baseball. So you know what? Hell yeah, I'm here for it. We were originally going to, bring up the best sports video games. We were supposed to record last week. We both got kind of busy. Obviously, life happens. But with the bombshells that happened today, we're going to put that one on hold, put it on the back burner. We'll be talking about that next week. But John, Kevin Durant, bro, like, what are your immediate thoughts?
My immediate thoughts are, I feel like this is the guy we've been whispering about, right? Like when we've been talking about, there's been some rumors like, we spend our time on Twitter and it's not always wasted, right? There've been some rumors floated out there that KD may be interested in the Suns. I started to just see, the fact that KD wasn't talking to the Nets and then has been essentially radio silent during this entire Kyrie thing, I thought was very interesting. And then sure enough, today, trade demanded, top of the list, Suns, Heat. That's where he really seems to be, driving and wanting himself to go. And, it just kind of goes back to what we talked about. We've been talking about the DA stuff and, maybe it seemed like we were just kind of Sun-centric, but we also knew that was really going to be a pivotal piece with not a lot of players that were going to be potentially out there that could be game changers for a franchise. Obviously, we didn't know for sure that this thing was going to crack open, but now it goes back to, hey, I might have sounded crazy a few weeks ago saying like, hey, like unless it involves KD or unless it involves, a top 25 type guy, I really don't want to talk about these moves because I think there's pieces here. And if not, let's bring them back. And sure enough, here we are today with KD demanding it. Windhorst kind of reporting that that's where he's trying to muscle to. And it would seem those two would just maybe be in the driver's seat from maybe what we've learned from when LeBron demands and asks for this, he gets that. And when KD demands and dictates a place, he maybe gets that. You can argue about leverage for 4 years. I don't know where you want to start, but that's kind of what my head's all wrapped around is just, wow, this is really happening. Wow, there's some big-time teams involved, and we can go through all the scenarios. But we're not crazy for talking about it because here we are.
Yeah, dude, I'll give you your flowers because when I was focusing on Indiana Pacers, mock trades and, dealing with like the Raptors or whatever for definitely not Kevin Durant style players, your mind was definitely focused on the big picture. And now look, we're here. I swear, last week it was, Kyrie Irving on his way out. And then all of a sudden he opts into his contract and people are like, oh, I guess it's just going to, we're rolling the dice again next year. But I just had a feeling too, man, on Monday when he did that, I was like, you know what? Like, I don't think this saga is over. I think he probably did that because he knows that it's much easier now for the Nets to trade him as opposed to trying to do any kind of real sign and trade that, he has to opt in or whatever, right? It just makes it easier for them to trade him now. And it was hilarious because on Monday I was at a pool party getting hellaciously sunburnt. Let me tell you, my skin is so red still. But our buddy Matt, he was actually telling me it seemed like every 15 minutes that all of a sudden the DeAndre Ayton to the Nets uh, live betting lines, it was going from like 6,000 or plus, or yeah, what, plus 6,000 to plus 2,200 to plus 800 to plus 400 to plus 220. And I was like, dude, oh my God, like it's going to freaking happen. Right. And then, of course, things don't happen for a couple days. And then here we are, man. Homie's asking for a trade. And the Phoenix Suns were the first team to be listed as one of his preferred destinations. My mind is blowed right now. It's insane.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the Vegas odds are really telling, right? You can continually see that number like cut in half and
It
cut
was
in
every
half.
15 minutes, dude. It was insane.
Yeah. So Vegas always knows what we always want to know, but it is always a great indicator of things that are happening. And like I said, we kind of saw some of the tea leaves out there, and we just it just kept seemingly being possible. There's always this. There could be a big fish for Phoenix. There could be a big fish for Phoenix, and
Yep.
And sure enough, here we are, and at least you're going to have an opportunity. Obviously, there's still a lot that can happen, and where you may end up being right is I don't know how this deal's going to work, right? So obviously, there's the float of are they just going to do the 2023, 2025, 2027 like alternating first round picks, and then
Or swaps.
Yeah, in swaps, and is it all the wings? So is it Jay Crowder? Is it Mikal Bridges? Is it Cam Johnson? Like, do we just dump all our wings at once, or Shamit's maybe mixed in there, or do they really want Da and it's sign and trade and he's the core, and then because you're kind of hearing maybe they're not interested in that. So maybe this is where you're right in the sense that maybe they do need that third partner to make this work, because maybe Da is a part of the deal, but then something else comes back, or Da goes somewhere else, so that there's compensation from another team to kind of fill that gap for what Brooklyn's looking for. So, you may still, come into the mix here, but I am just really happy that the Suns, if they're going to make a move, it seems that it's going to be a big one. And the risk is that, they get no one, fall flat on their face, maybe keep Da, but then I think that's okay. I think then it's like you bring back a 60-win team at its core, and then you start to build around it. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on, what those, I don't know, like what you'd be willing to give? Is there anything you would not be willing to give? Obviously we root as Phoenix fans, but even if you're sitting from the outside looking in, like what may or may not make sense to you?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because everybody's first inclination is, okay, DeAndre Ayton in a sign and trade to Brooklyn, right? Even Vegas is starting to think that. But, love him or hate him, John Gambadoro came out and said that the Nets don't seem to be very interested in DeAndre Ayton. So that leads me to believe you got to get a third team involved, maybe Indiana. Maybe they ship out Brogdon to the Nets since they're going to lose Kyrie anyway. Maybe you see just
Pacers
a mega
are back,
trade.
baby.
Yeah, Pacers are back. Maybe you see like a mega trade, like we've seen it before, right? And it's always like deadline trades like this too, like that you get 3, 4, or 5 teams involved. Maybe you see one where it's like the Lakers are getting Kyrie, the Pacers are getting Westbrook, the Pacers are getting Ayton, maybe like Brogdon and Turner go to the Nets, and then the Nets also get maybe like Mikal, I don't know, and then we get KD. There's a lot of moving parts out there. I guess we just really have to read the tea leaves the next 24 hours, because I think it is going to be very telling, right? Like one of the biggest fears that Suns fans should have is like DeAndre Ayton accepts like a qualifying offer from like San Antonio or from like Indiana straight up. And then they kind of get the leverage taken away. But the word on the street is that Kevin Durant announced today that he wanted to trade because he's cognizant of the fact that DeAndre Ayton, is obviously trying to get his money too and trying to get that deal done as soon as possible. He doesn't want him to stagnate on the market either. So I think possibly even by tomorrow, it could be a huge Friday going into the weekend. But if it's a straight up trade, I mean, I think it has to start with DA just for the money, right? Because no matter what, like if he's going to get traded to Brooklyn, he has to agree to a contract more than likely. So he'll be making what on a rookie scale max contract, probably like what, 35, 36 mil. And then, you throw in maybe like a Crowder. I would hate to lose Mikal, but for Kevin Durant, you kind of have to do it. And then maybe just like, I don't know, Bruce Brown or something from the Nets as a throw-in. I'm not sure. That would be kind of like the framework I would look at, but I think you're more so going to look at maybe like a 3 or 4 team trade.
Yeah, I think we could see a lot of pieces move, and like just to kind of like maybe back it up through the day. It was so interesting because it starts with like, all right, there's this trade, and Windhorse is like, hey, he wants to drive it to Phoenix, and the reason I believe in this the most for Phoenix is simply because this is what KD wants, right? And I know I said it kind of in the intro, but I'm a pretty firm believer that these guys in the NBA have the most leverage
Oh
because
yeah,
you trade him to whatever, like go ahead, right? Like, okay, Oklahoma City has all the things they want to give. Portland thinks they can send all this stuff, whatever. If he doesn't want to play with you and if he thinks he's ripping out your entire core and can't make it work with the pieces that are left over, it doesn't matter. He's not going there. He's going to pull the Ben Simmons crap. He'll do whatever. His knee's going to start to, man, oh, it's real achy. And he might not be playing for you ever. So you ultimately have to make one of these top 5, top 10. Not every guy has this leverage, right? But KD is a very different beast. So right from go, when he says he wants, Suns Heat, and that's really the only list that's been floated out there. And believe me, all these guys can get whatever they want floated out there. That's why it's crazy. But then you have, boom, Stephen A. Smith is on, and he's like, no, it's Booker has to be in the deal, otherwise Brooklyn won't talk. Well, it's nice to know Stephen A. Smith talks to Brooklyn. Great. Like all these guys just tell on themselves in terms of who they talk to as to where this information is being floated from. And so it really doesn't matter to me. It's just interesting. Like, what does KD want? Then you get the Boston. Oh man, well, what if we threw in Jaylen Brown? And I think there's a lot of other deals, but when I look around, like I don't see it for the Heat unless there's just like a house of cards level full of moves that I just am not seeing, right? Like
sure.
I don't have genius trade brain and I'm not seeing the 7 moves ahead. And for everything else, it's yeah, there's other better pieces. Like maybe you would rather prefer, Jaylen Brown, but does Durant want to go to Boston? Does he see that as good for his legacy or whatever, right? There's all these things to think about. And so I just keep coming back to the Suns, and maybe I'm delusional, but do you see like any other, I mean, is anything else? And I know, maybe you were working harder than me, but I'm just not seeing anything else out there that makes a ton of sense. Nothing's impossible, of course, but he's going to want to go where he wants to go. And I could see other partners getting involved, but does he want to go to Boston? Of course, people are going to float the Warriors, but I don't think that's realistic. And the Heat just seems like a weird deal because they can't include Bam. Because of a weird deal, they would have to move Ben Simmons before they could bring on Bam. If they should move Ben Simmons tomorrow, then I get really nervous, and I think Bam's coming in and Pat Riley's done it again. But otherwise, to me, it's just about what pieces make it work. They're going to continue to leverage for everything they can, and maybe it's every single pick in the rest of Phoenix Suns history. But for a franchise without a title, you probably take that swing.
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked me like where I could see it happen because, while I was working today, and if my boss is listening to this, I promise you, dude, I was working. Don't stress. I had one of those Twitter spaces open. Alex Kennedy, a few of those guys were just briefly talking about who could get involved, and then Windhorse comes out and says half the league has. More than half the league has inquired about Kevin Durant, has actually called the Nets about this. And, no shit, it's Kevin Durant, right? And they were saying that Kevin Durant, outside of Shaq, could be probably the greatest player ever traded, because LeBron didn't get traded. He signed with the Lakers. He signed with the Heat, what have you. Kevin Durant signed with the Warriors. He signed with the Nets. So he could be potentially, right? This could be an just dynamo of a trade offer. But then you start looking around and you really hit it on the head, right? It's not necessarily the assets that are going to get a team, or that is going to get a team Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant is 33 years old, right? He's not a young buck. He's still incredible, a top 3 player in the league when healthy. You have to look at where he would actually want to go, because there are teams out there that could potentially either match what Phoenix could send out or even do a little bit better. You look at like the Pelicans, right? Like he would never want to go to New Orleans. No superstar really does, right? But if they were to get involved, they have a lot of trade pieces they could, throw out there. Maybe even a Zion. Toronto probably doesn't want to go to Toronto because they don't have another superstar. But if they wanted to throw in Scotty Barnes, that's a powerful trade chip too. He's coming off a Rookie of the Year season. You look at the Memphis Grizzlies, they just re-upped Ja Morant, which we'll get into. But they could throw Triple J in there, and that's a kind of a spicy trade offer too. And then, of course, you're going to have the Laker fans saying, oh, well, we're going to get both KD and Kyrie Irving, but like the logistics there just simply don't work. You know, you're
But
going to
don't
have
you
to
love
get.
it? Don't you love it that it gets still floated out there? Windhorst has to go sit there with a straight face, and he's just totally, team LeBron's agency, and he has to just be
Yeah.
like, or guys, this just in, the Lakers could trade none other than Russell Westbrook for, I guess, both guys. I don't even know how that would work. It's so hilarious that
Yeah. I
these get
mean,
floated.
for me to get a Bleacher Report notification on my phone saying the Lakers are interested in both, like, no shit. Like, every team is interested in both, right? Like,
So yeah, so remind your boss that you were actually working, and if the Lakers would shut up, you'd have plenty of time in your day.
I think he was more distracting, sending me, messages like, oh, the Lakers are interested in both. I'm like, dude, I'm trying to work a deal right now. Let's calm down. Anyway, but
I
like,
guess they're
even looking,
trading LeBron. They're trading AD. Like they have to trade them
yeah,
both, right? Like it doesn't even make sense. They have to move $80 million worth of salary. Sure.
yeah, realistically, to get both, you have to move Russ, which why would the Nets want Russ? They don't, you know, then they'd have to trade AD, and like AD's trade, like, value has never been lower in his career because the dude is made out of paper mache. And then like the rest of their roster is just so, gross. Like there's no good players on that team. I mean, nobody wants Talon. What's his name?
It's
Tucker
always Taylor.
Horton.
Yeah, Taylor Horton, Taylor Tucker Horton. Nobody even knows, but
Yeah.
he's the
THT.
big.
Yeah.
He's a huge piece for the Lakers. If you didn't
Yeah.
know,
And if you look at who they've signed today, too, right? Like they've signed a few pieces today, but it's more of the same. It's like what they did last year. They just signed a bunch of guys that didn't work out where they were at before, and now they're going to be, these stud bench players on the Lakers. It's guys that nobody wants. So like cross the Lakers off, cross the Pelicans off. I would even cross off the Raptors. The Celtics are kind of an interesting story, but they made a comment on that Twitter space like, man, like Kevin Durant's already taken a couple big hits to just his like personal resume by joining the Warriors, by building a super team in Brooklyn. Would he really want to go to the team that swept him in the playoffs? I doubt it, right? Like, not a good look. I doubt he wants to go there. Plus, like, if you're a fan of the Boston Celtics, I'm sorry about saying this, but, some of the most egregious fans in the NBA, and Kevin Durant is a very vocal superstar. I doubt he would take kind to like Boston fandom. So when I look at just the main players, I think, the two that were mentioned really are like kind of the only options that I can foresee really happening, right? Like Phoenix has all the pieces they need to make the move. It's if they want to include those pieces. Like, do they want to include Mikal? Like, they love Mikal Bridges. Do they want to include a Cam Johnson? He is a little bit older than most like guys entering into like a rookie scale extension, but
that
he's
means close to his prime. So I mean,
yeah,
that's what's right. Like that's why it's pretty good for the net. Like I mean, that's why it goes work both ways. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but like, it's crazy, right? Like the story tells the story the story leads in the NBA, and then the pieces, if they're there, just kind of figure itself out. Like,
yeah. And then like Jay Crowder, like Crowder's already been on Twitter talking about like, oh, they're going to go out and get a better four guy. Like he's gone. Like I'm perfectly like aware that Jay Crowder will not be wearing number 99 for the Phoenix Suns next year. It's just, is he going to be in Miami? Is he going to be in Brooklyn? Like who knows, right? But he'll probably be part of the deal. And then one of the wings, and then probably DeAndre Ayton, or if they mix in a third team. But I think when you really digest it and you take off your crazy goggles, like there really are only two teams that can make a move for Kevin Durant. And you're completely right too. Like Kevin Durant is a superstar, a mega superstar, not just in the NBA, but in the world stage of basketball, that like the Nets can't pull a Ben Simmons and say, oh, well, we'll just fine you. Like it's Kevin Durant. Like it's not Ben Simmons who was sitting out for Lord knows what, mental health, what have you. If he had mental health issues, I totally get it. But like the dude obviously dragged that on for other reasons. Kevin Durant played through injury. He dragged that team through the playoffs. Like they're going to trade him out of good faith. They talked about it today on that Twitter space. The Nets have to do it because if they want to be able to rebuild and rebuild quickly, they need to show potential free agents or people that they could trade for that they're not a scumbag franchise, and I don't think they are. They've just traded for some diva guys, like Kyrie Irving is a diva, Ben Simmons is a diva. James Harden is a diva. Kevin Durant, I don't think is a diva. I think he's just very honest and transparent, but like you got to move him now because he wants out, So I think it's going to happen in the next 48 hours.
Yeah, and I think just because what you mentioned, I think the Nets want to be a good partner, right? And they've had two big threes come through there in the last 10 years, and they've still had no problem. Like as much as you want to laugh about some of the old trades that they made when they had Prokhorov involved, they quickly flipped right back to this, right? They were right back in a situation where they had Kyrie, Harden, and Durant all playing well together, and for I think it was all of 16 games they played together. But when you saw them, you were like, oh my God, this is over for everybody else. I want nothing to do with them. And so they've been able to do that. And I think they're in a really good place where if they bring in some really good pieces from Phoenix and then a slew of picks, and then they are able to then potentially flip Kyrie, because I think that's still very much on the table. Whether they buy him out, whether they flip him, ultimately how that plays out, I don't know. Kyrie's made it very known he does want to go to LA. So I think that part of the deal is very real. Kyrie may end up playing with LeBron again, however he does decide to get there. And, they have pieces, right? Like, and they have Ben Simmons that they've already acquired from the James Harden piece. So they can actually retool, save face, keep really good relationships in terms of, hey, if I'm a superstar and I go to the Nets and ultimately things don't work out, they're going to work with me is a really good partner to have, right? And who wouldn't want to be, when you're in one of those big cities that's a destination, like you want to be a good partner to those guys that are coming in. So I do really see it as it can be a win-win for both of these teams. I think if you have Simmons, DA, Mikal Bridges, bring in whatever from Kyrie, you still have Joe Harris. Like there's pieces there. Like that's not a bad team in the East. I'm pretty sure that's still a playoff team. So I don't think they have to, bury their heads, be ashamed. I think they can just start to retool, rebuild, and then start to address it from the draft, any gaps that they have moving forward. So,
yeah,
man.
Let's put out the fire. Let's put out the fire real quick too. Like the Suns are not going to trade Devin Booker for Kevin Durant. Like he just signed the Supermax contract, 4 years, 24 million. Like, the guy definitely deserves it. He's
and by rule, he can't be traded for a year now after that deal.
There you go. Instantly put out. Yeah, instantly put out. Now, granted, there's always stipulations to that, right? Like sign and trade, stuff like that. If he hasn't signed on the dotted line yet, but it sounds like he has. But let's also keep it like a buck. Like Kevin Durant wants to go to Phoenix because he wants to play with Devin Booker. He obviously probably wants to play with Chris Paul because he's never played with a playmaker like Chris Paul, and he's good friends with Chris Paul from his Team USA days. Chris Paul is one of the most popular players in the NBA, and he wants to go play for Monty Williams, who he's had, multiple relationships, whether it was when Monty was on Team USA or, different times, right? Like Devin Booker's a huge piece of that. Like you don't trade Devin Booker for Kevin Durant. You trade Kevin Durant to play with Devin Booker. So like that asinine rumor from Stephen A. Smith from ESPN, like let's just put that to bed. That's not happening.
Yeah, again, nice work by Stephen A. Glad you're keeping your relationships and your sources, whatever. Right. With that, I don't know. Do you want to jump into some of the other pieces? I know you mentioned some of them. I mean, do you want to talk about the Heat? I mean, to me, just real quickly, and then you can touch on it and expand on it if you want. It's just simple as they can't move Bam. I know I mentioned that earlier, but they can't move Bam because of a weird rule, which makes it extra difficult. Sure, you could argue the same on the Sun side. Maybe they're not interested in Ayton, so they have to involve another party. So maybe there is still something there for the Heat. But then you look at the rest of that roster, and it's like, what are you going to do? Take on Butler? Are you going to take on Lowry? Like, those are older, later contracts. Like, all these guys, by the way, like on TV, which this is why I don't watch them. Like, everybody wants, well, if we're going to trade KD, then like, how are you not getting, like it has to be this guy back, and that's just not how this works. Like no one.
Well, the only piece that is even viable that would even catch an eye would be Tyler Hero, and Tyler Hero, like I like Hero. I think he has good game, but he is not anywhere on the level of like the centerpiece of a trade for somebody like Kevin Durant. And I'm not saying that like DeAndre Ayton is better than Hero. I think he is. I think he has more star power potentially than Tyler Hero.
Aren't all three of those guys at worst on the same level, and we have two of them?
Sure, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like at worst, you're getting two of them that potentially are on that level. Like, yes, Hero's a nice playmaker, but come on, like you're talking about a smallish guard that can't defend. You're giving up a giant wing who scores over everybody. Hero's a specialist.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with you. That's why I get why he wants to go to Miami because, you know, Eric Spoelstra, we've said it numerous times on this podcast. He's an incredible coach. The Heat culture is a real thing. We clown on it, but it is a real thing. Like they are always in the mix to win. You know, Jimmy Butler is, you know, an incredible player to play with, as long as you can handle that energy. And like Kyle Lowry, even though he didn't look great last year, is still a good point guard, you know. But when you're looking at just the potential to join a team that you could win a real championship with, like the Suns are it, right? Like, am I wrong in thinking that? Like, I know I have my orange and purple goggles on, but in the real world, like the Suns are the only team that have a real core that he can really go to and win a championship with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that. I think it's not only what KD probably wants, but it's also that combination of what you can get back, where you're not pulling everything and gutting that team. And if you're Brooklyn, presumably, I mean, I don't know for sure, and this is why I think it's interesting that everybody keeps pairing like these older veteran guys. Like, well, if I'm going to move KD, then like I want Lillard back. Why don't I get well? Because that's just not what happens. No one else is going to give up their
This isn't
superstar.
2K, you
Yeah, and
know.
then KD doesn't want to leave for that. And then when you look at the roster, if you can't, because Bam's the guy, right? If you could move Bam, then I think it's different. I think if you can get Bam to Brooklyn somehow, then I think yes, Brooklyn gets a really, gets a really good piece back, and KD's kind of getting what he wants. And then I don't know what those other filler pieces are, but without Bam, you have to take an aging player, right? You have to take Lowry at the end of his career and Butler, who is I love Butler and I think he's a dog, but I still always feel like when I'm watching him, I'm like, is this it? Is this the
Yeah.
last year? And that's why I think, adding a KD makes that easy because they can go back and forth. And sure, the fit can work there, but it doesn't work for Brooklyn. Like, it just seems like Brooklyn, if the choices are KD saying it's this, or this, and like, let's say there's a third team we don't know about, for what we know, it's Phoenix and Miami. And the pieces in Phoenix, in terms of trade value, seems so much better than what Miami can offer because of that weird Bam rule.
And Kevin Durant has to look at the Suns and realize that they already have two of the best mid-range shooters in the NBA. And if you add him to the mix, like, how do you stop that, right? Like, all three of those guys can hit threes as well. Like, they're all killers from the mid-range. You already have Booker who can get a bucket on his own. That's going to make life easier for Kevin Durant. And that's why I think they truly are the Vegas betting favorite for Kevin Durant. Like, dude, like it's a no-brainer. And Brooklyn can sit here and the reports can come out that, oh, Brooklyn's not interested in DeAndre Ayton. But like, let's, like, you keep saying it, right? Unless you find a trade partner for Ben Simmons, which it's not going to happen, like you're not going to get a better player than DeAndre Ayton. And like,
Yeah,
you're
trying to trade Kyrie and Ben this summer. Like,
yeah,
okay,
no,
cool.
yeah,
Like, good
you're
luck.
not going to,
Get rid of him.
you're not,
Yeah, sure. Make
you're
some
not
ball.
going to gut, you're not going to gut your team, right? Like, this is not NBA 2K. Like, it doesn't happen. And like it's just, like, you're much more the DeAndre Ayton defender than I am, but I'm not also like a hater. Like, DeAndre Ayton's got a hell of amount of potential. He's proven it in the finals. He's proven in the playoffs that he can be a very, very good player. And like, for Brooklyn, like, if Kevin Durant is forcing your hand and you look in the mirror and you say, you know what, we can go get a guy who's 22, 23 on a rookie scale, max extension, who has proven it on the biggest stage that he can be a real option, like, go out and do it. Like, you're not going to get anything better than that. You're just not. Look at what happened with DeJounte Murray and the Spurs. The Spurs got nothing for him. And DeJounte was a all-star this year, an incredible guard, loads of potential, and they didn't even get anything for him. So if the Brooklyn Nets look at that and they're like, hey, at least we can get this potential stud at center, which you need in the Eastern Conference, just do it. Go out and get your guy.
Yeah, and if not, he's a young guy who you sign and you can move off of later, right? Their roster doesn't have to be set this year. Their job is, as their GM, like if I'm the Brooklyn GM, it's just to collect the best assets given the parameters that I've been given, understanding that I have to maintain a good relationship with someone like KD, who frankly is just, he's like a torchbearer for the league, right? It's a little different than when you're trading Kyrie or Simmons. Like with Simmons, you could probably trade him anywhere, tell him to deal with it. And, the national media, everybody will just be like, yeah, wear it, Ben.
Yeah.
But with KD, it's going to be different. If he decides to make noise, it's different. And again, I think just having him wanting to steer the ship the way is the biggest piece. I don't know. Do you want to touch on anything else there? I mean, if not, I kind of want to just move to, I think it's interesting that because we've talked about Booker, kind of touch and go throughout the playoffs, but because Booker is that dude, because he's every bit of the level of Tatum, because he's on the Olympic team, because he's gotten to a finals already this early in his career, because he's built a relationship with KD, this is now all possible. And you got rewarded with the Supermax today. And I don't know if you want to start jumping on other stuff or we can honestly pound the KD drum forever. But I think it's super interesting that as much as everybody maybe is quick to turn left, away from Booker, I don't know. I just feel super smart again. I'm like, not that, he's just our guy. And that's kind of, it is what it is. But I've always been like, hey, this guy can play and this guy can score and this guy matters. And he's still super, super young, but super, super mature and has already been to a finals. And that's what's attracting him. And that's why he's getting the super max. And, you could compare him to Beal and some other guys. And maybe it's just the fortunes of having Chris Paul around and some other things. But I also find it super interesting that he's the piece that KD looks at a guy who's at the twilight of his career in terms of his real winning championship years. And he says, that's a guy I want to attach myself to.
Yeah, I think it really is a really cool redemption story. Booker, God love him, stuck around through all the crap, shitty years of the Suns that you and I painfully watched every game, has turned this franchise into what it once was, right? Like one of the league's best, an attractive option for superstars to entertain. And like this Kevin Durant trade, I think you're right. It totally hinges on Booker being there because a 33-year-old Kevin Durant who has 4 years left on his contract is not going to want to be traded to the Phoenix Suns if all they had was Chris Paul, who's 38 years old, right? Because there's not much of a future there. But he sees Devin Booker, who's 26, and Kardashian list now. Like he knows, like it's go time, dude. This is a guy I could spend the next 4 years with, potentially win a chip or two and really cement my legacy. Like this really is like, between like really sticking it out for all those crummy years, scoring the 70-point game, getting the team to the finals, attracting Chris Paul, now attracting Kevin Durant. Like I firmly believe, and this might be sacrilegious and you can tell me I'm wrong, Devin Booker may be the best Phoenix Sun of all time.
Well, he's going to be, maybe you're early on it, you know what I mean? But I think you're safe punching your ticket the same way KD feels good punching that ticket. And the other thing I will say I have to give credit to that I've spent a lot of time talking smack to is this is still right? Like all these things can turn for a million of different reasons, right? As you mentioned, like someone can throw a deal at Ayton that throws a wrench in this just to do it. The winds can change. Someone else can want to go here. An agent gets involved there. There's a million things that can change, and maybe suddenly KD's attention looks elsewhere, and Brooklyn just refuses to do business with Phoenix or whatever. Like there's a million things that could still happen. But if they're able to even be close, right? And obviously, the only thing that really matters is if you get this done. But we have to give a little credit to James Jones for putting this together because he has the pieces available potentially to get this done. What I will laugh about today, though, is like anytime, and if you're a Suns fan, you know this, but James Jones builds his team on this 3x5 index card, and he wants 3 layers of people at 5 different positions. Yeah, well, all that doesn't matter if you get KD, right? So if you can get KD, Booker, and Chris Paul in the roster, you figure out the rest and you throw your index cards into the air. So hilarious that they still talk that way and are pretending to kind of play this off. But if they're able to, be in the neighborhood with this, good on them because they made it livable for Book by bringing in Chris Paul. And that made it very, very different here. They drafted DeAndre Ayton. He's a huge piece of this. They all went to a finals together. Mikal Bridges is here. Cam Johnson is here. Jay Crowder is here. Those pieces all matter, and they may matter in what takes them to the next level, or maybe the team that we see return to fight another day. But I just want to give some credit there too. But yeah, man, you got to love Book, right? Like, I just think this is a really good stamp of approval for him, regardless of what happens, that KD put Phoenix's name out there first.
Yeah, I think the trolls on Twitter and the haters can kind of shut up right now, right? Like the guy just got the Supermax. He's gotten his team to the finals. He keeps attracting multiple superstars. He has LeBron's stamp of approval, which you can take that with what you will. But like he is super well respected in this league. And I think he's going to be just, a phenomenal ambassador for the league for years to come. Speaking of, part of that tweet that Shams put out about him, signing his Supermax is he's actually going to be on the cover of NBA 2K, which, hey, I know you don't play 2K. I don't even really play 2K anymore. But when was the last time the Phoenix Suns have gotten this much shine that their superstar player is going to be on the cover of one of the most popular games in the world? I mean, again, just cementing his legacy as one of the best guys to ever put on, the Suns uniform.
Absolutely. And that is huge, right? Like to be on the cover of that. And you mentioned, he had a nice little run into Jenner, not that, hey, things could be worse in life. And then ultimately him and his buddy, Kat, both signed today. And I'm going to forgive me because I don't know the name offhand, but both represented by a female agent. So first, like Supermax by a female agent, and she represents both Kat and Booker. Both got them done today. So everything looking up for Devin Booker. So, if you're out there hating on Devin Booker, that's fine, but it's going to be a rough couple of days for you, it looks like. At least that's how I see it.
Yep. Well, hey, let's jump off the Phoenix Suns bandwagon real quick. Let's take a look at some of the other things that are happening within the league. I mentioned it earlier, but DeJounte Murray getting traded to the Hawks. You and I mentioned it a few episodes back that the Hawks needed to make a move because it really did seem kind of like the Trey show, and it kind of was. And hey, they went out and they traded for, arguably one of the best point guards in the Western Conference, who's going to, play right next to one of the best point guards in the Eastern Conference next year. And like I mentioned earlier, they didn't really give up a whole lot for him. Granted, they did give up 2 unprotected first and Danilo Gallinari, who's, since been released. But what a move for an up-and-coming team in the Eastern Conference. I think that really cements them as a really good team going into next year. Murray's a really good defender, super long. I think he pairs really, really well with Trey. What are your thoughts on that trade?
Yeah, I love this for them. I think it's such a nice pairing with him and Trey. Everything that Trey needs, it feels like. And the weird part about DeJounte and the Spurs is, right, they're super unwatchable this last couple of years.
Yeah.
The Spurs are not fun to watch. So I kind of wish I knew more about DeJounte, but everything I know about Murray is that he can defend, he's long, he gives you the option to play make, he can go get his own shot. I mean, the main thing is that you get Trey off, like you need that head of the snake, that person that can actually be an on-ball pressure. He now gives you that. And then you're able to kind of play them back and forth off the 1 and the 2, right? So if you see that in the playoffs this most recently, the Hawks really being super dependent on Trey, which is, I'm not sure if it's a Hawks decision or just a Trey decision, but when he decided to do that, they cut that off and then it's done. And then they look very lost. So this gives them an option B, right? Which, we very much see with other teams, right? If Steph's not going, like you need something to happen with Wiggins or Clay, right? And that's kind of the same kind of thing you have going here is you need that secondary ball handler to play off that primary. And it really doesn't matter who the primary is. I just think really it's just a matter of as long as Trey is willing to share with Murray, this makes a ton of sense on paper.
Yeah, and it looks like they could still make some more moves, like, similar to the last offseason. John Collins is seemingly available on the trade market. Definitely a good player to have out there to kind of help build up the rest of your team. If they can go into next season with the 2 guards, DeAndre Hunter, Clint Capella, they'll have Kevin Huerter still, who has his moments. And then if they can just continue to build up their bench by whatever they get for Collins, hey, they're going to be much, much stronger next year. That'll definitely be a name I'll be watching. I like John Collins' game. I think he's really fun, can shoot the 3, can dunk it. But the Hawks have made some good moves, and you and I kind of forecasted that after they were eliminated from the playoffs. So, kudos to us. Looking at some of the other moves in the NBA, we haven't had too many trades. Other than that, can you think of any other trades, John?
No, it's not, I mean, there wasn't a lot happening trade market wise. I mean, the other just kind of big names like Beal obviously opted out, signed right back in. He's going to cash in for 50 million a year, which all these contracts look ridiculous today. The one thing I saw that was kind of interesting out there, and again, I don't remember who said it, but like someone was like, I think that a player in the league right now will be the first guy who legit makes 100 million a year. And when you're looking at some of these contracts now, and guys are signing for plus 50, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, Beal obviously re-upping with Washington. That doesn't really move anything. Kind of knew it was going to happen. But he's out there.
Oh, you know what? The other trade that did happen was the Wizards and the Nuggets trade, which now makes a little bit more sense now that Jokic has signed the richest contract in NBA history. They did trade Will Barton and Monte Morris to the Wizards for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Ish Smith, former Phoenix Suns great. But man, that was kind of a tough trade to swallow at first. On my end at least, Will Barton's a nice player. Monte Morris is one of the better backup point guards in the league. That move does make the Wizards, in my opinion, definitely a little bit better. But yeah, Bradley Beal, just keep cashing them checks, big guy. I don't know what he's doing. You would think he'd want to go to a more competitive team, but hey, money talks. So, did you have any thoughts on that trade?
Yeah. I mean, I thought that trade was interesting too. It was kind of like parts going in different directions. And I don't know, I feel like those guys are all the fit guys. So just depending on who you like for what fit. I guess the reason I keep staring at the Beal deal and I'm looking at my notes, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Beal just feels like he's one of those guys who's locked into, and I was talking to one of my buddies who's really plugged into the NBA, and he's like, does he just not feel like he just signed the John Wall he just signed the same contract. He just signed that Harden, John Wall, now he's worth 50 million and now it's almost impossible to move him. And so whenever he decides he does want to win, does anybody care?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So that part's a little awkward, but yeah, I did think that Nuggets move was interesting. I guess I like the piece they get back, but then it does seem like they lose a couple guys that fit that role. I don't really understand their roster. Their roster's weird to me, but I also am afraid of them still. So I don't know. Jokic is so good, and whatever pieces you put around him could work perfectly. And if he's in the conversations, I kind of trust it.
It's definitely a bunch of guys that don't play a whole lot of defense, but they can score. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, I clowned on him a lot when he was on the Lakers because he was a Laker. But the guy can score. He can shoot the ball pretty well. I just think it was a tough pill to swallow because Monte Morris was really kind of the linchpin of that offense, at least running it. Murray was out last year. And then, Barton has definitely had his moments where he can tear it up. Now, granted, the Nuggets did draft Bones Highland last year, who had some really good moments for a rookie last year. So maybe that's where they had the confidence to go ahead and trade Monte to the Wizards. So other than that, now we're just looking at different free agent signings. Obviously, the biggest one so far is going to be our main man heading to the Knicks. Jalen Brunson. Yeah,
it happens per everybody.
Yeah, and who would have thought that, right? That hasn't been in the tea leaves for Lord knows how long. What, a month? I think the Knicks trading literally everybody on trade day, not really having a pick themselves, even though they had a billion chances to pick somebody, and then trading Kimba and moving all those pieces just to go out and spend over $100 million on Jalen Brunson. Brunson's a nice player, but I don't know if that's the guy that you make all those moves for. I wouldn't feel comfortable if I was a Knicks fan.
I don't like it. It doesn't, I wouldn't be super excited if I'm a Knicks fan. He's a really good player, right? So I don't want to sit here and bash Jalen Brunson. I think he gives you an interesting game. I'm not sure he's a true point, and he's not really one of those dominant wings. And it seems like he was actually kind of paid accordingly. So it doesn't seem like a deal that's a bad deal. I think the most interesting thing about the Jalen piece to me is just that finally one of those kind of college basketball moves worked in the NBA. And I know people just kind of throw that around and they're discrediting that, his relationships and his family, like those are actual real coaches that have been around the league for a while. But it is kind of funny that someone hired a family member and then the Knicks were finally able to land a free agent. So that just kind of makes me chuckle. The Knicks kind of just generally I think if the Knicks, I mean, if you listen to Knicks people, the Knicks universe, I think the thing that's just confusing is they just don't get it because the Knicks don't really talk about what their plan is. It's like, hey, like our DNA is we're going to get all these tough guys and we're trying to build like the Heat and we just want to have good, tough players here. Or, hey, we're collecting pieces so that eventually if, that one asset does come available, Kevin Durant, like we'd like to be able to be ready to make that move. You know what I mean? But they don't really say one thing or the other. So nobody knows what they're doing. No one's a mind reader. So everything they do just seems random.
Yeah. I just don't really understand their team. Jalen Brunson, he's not a huge 3-point shooter. I'm not saying he's a bad 3-point shooter, right? But I can't think of anything that he does extraordinarily well. And now he's kind of the face of that franchise, right? So they have him. They still have Robinson at the 5. He could probably be moved. I could see that. They still have
RJ Barrett's in town.
RJ Barrett, who, hey, he kind of showed out last year. He wasn't too bad, right?
Yeah, it's kind of I think that's the thing is like it's unclear if they're like trying to build around RJ Barrett or they think he's just kind of one of those guys and they need a couple more guys. Like are they waiting for RJ Barrett to peak and they want to put the ball in his hands a lot, or now are they saying we actually kind of know we don't love Barrett. We like Barrett, and now we need Brunson to handle the ball. That's why they're confusing, right? It's just like you don't really understand where's the ball supposed to be.
Yeah, and then they still have Julius Randle, who,
right.
even though he's a 4, he likes having the ball in his hands a lot. So just, I don't know, interesting team building, typical Knicks, just pretty odd, if you ask me. The only other free agent domino that we're kind of waiting for would be Zach LaVine. He is a free agent. I think he could be a really nice piece for a team. Definitely had kind of a breakout year last year with that Chicago Bulls roster. He could be potentially going back to Chicago. Do you see any other teams that could be surprise LaVine signees?
I don't. I just think he's going back. I just like that's what I really believe. It's not that I don't want to entertain any other ideas. I think he's going back. I think he's going back, and whether he's a piece down the road or not, I don't know. But I don't really, I'm not really hearing anything that really makes sense in terms of someone jumping out and grabbing him. I think they built something that they're at least happy with, and it's kind of it's a weird free agency market, right? We continue to talk about kind of the same 3 or 4 pieces, which aren't huge, right? Until KD kind of mix things up, and now that solves everything, right? So we don't know until kind of that big piece moves, really what's happening. And of course, like another big piece, Ayton is tied to that. So it gets really interesting. And no, I kind of just feel like LaVine ultimately just turns right back where he came from and takes the money that's available to him.
Yep. I think at the end of the day, the next few days are going to be just dominated by trade talk. And to be honest, that's usually what dominates the NBA offseason anyway. It's not usually free agent signings typically. So, we've talked about Kevin Durant ad nauseum. We've talked about Kyrie Irving. Let's see what unfolds the next few days. And, a few people have said on Twitter, hey, buckle up. It could be pretty crazy, but we'll be active on Twitter. We'll be active on all our socials. So stay tuned there. Moving away from the NBA offseason, obviously the other bombshell that dropped today came from college football. And John and I are both fans of Pac-12, have been our whole lives. And the LA schools have decided, you know what? Enough is enough. We're going to go ahead and join the Big 12 and decide to fly 1,200 miles week after week to go get beat up by some bigger offensive lines. What are your thoughts, John?
Well, I would say first and foremost, it's just kind of a bummer, right? I think no matter what conference you root for, I think even if you're a Big Ten fan, right, this makes you a little sad, right? I don't think the Big Ten has been really excited about adding Maryland or Rutgers. I don't think that. I think this is a little bit sexier, and so if you ultimately know that this is the game, then you're happy you're adding, a big name brand like USC, and if you'll UCLA has to come along, then so be it. Obviously, they're a nice brand in basketball, so I don't want to, push that aside. But first and foremost, it's sad because no matter what conference you're into, right? If you're a Big Ten fan, you want to see Iowa, play Minnesota for whatever reason. You couldn't pay me to watch it, but for whatever reason, that's probably what you want to see year in and year out because there's some stupid trophy tied to that. And if we're in the Pac-12, right? You want to see USC versus Oregon State at 9:30 p.m. Why? I don't know. I really don't know. But that's just like what we're used to, right? So like you don't want to adjust to that change. The second part I'll just say to that because you did point it out. I don't understand this. Why is USC and UCLA going to go get beat up by Iowa and Maryland? Like
Yeah.
I'm not really sure why everybody assumes like, oh well, they haven't played in the cold and they haven't played at 9 a.m. You're right, that sucks. If you're a fan, you definitely don't want to travel for that crap and play like a more boring game than what you typically would probably get in a more typically high scoring Pac-12 conference. But I do take some offense to that. I'm like, what? Pac-12 has been dominating the Rose Bowl. Like I've watched it for years. I mean, yeah, Ohio State's scary. Sure, Michigan recruits really well,
Penn State.
but the rest of you are dreamers. You're dreamers. Like you're not anything special. You're not. So like if you're from Iowa, if you're from Nebraska, if you're from Minnesota, honestly, even if you're Penn State, like I don't really care. Like when was the last? I mean, I know Penn State's had a couple nice runs, but it really isn't that special.
They recruit well. I will say that.
They do. Yeah, but that's the same thing you would say about USC, right? Like
True.
USC has had more first round picks than any of those teams. Now, USC still hasn't translated that to the field. And so you could certainly smack on UCLA and USC. The beautiful thing here is that I can light the fires on both sides. And if everybody kills each other, I'm out and I could care less because I don't have a dog in that fight. But yeah, man, it's a huge shakeup. And I think it's just going to be, obviously we're going to just continue this race, right? Who goes to the SEC, who goes to the Big Ten, and those are going to be the big two. And then everything else is up for grabs.
The thing I tend to think, it does kind of suck that, as soon as USC kind of comes back into relevance, they get Lincoln Riley, they get all these recruits. I'm by no means a USC fan, but the Pac-12 is always more fun when USC is good because then when your team upsets USC or, just getting more spotlight on the Pac-12, it is a lot more fun, right? And now that they're leaving, it's like, okay, well, where does the conference go from here? And obviously, any Pac-12 fan can point out the blame. It definitely falls on Larry Scott. He positioned the conference for failure for years with the TV deals, having games start at 9:30 where nobody on the East Coast gives a shit to watch. And then, putting the headquarters for the conference in the Bay Area where it's extremely expensive, just mistake after mistake after mistake. And that's why this is happening. But then you kind of have to look at it and you're like, okay, well, where do we go from here, right? Like, there's no way to replace the visibility that a USC would get, or even UCLA. Like, you kind of clowned on their football program, but historically they have had incredible seasons, right? Like, they were a powerhouse at one point, and they are always part of the conversation. But now, like, where does the Pac-12 go from here? Like, does Oregon all of a sudden, join? I mean, I don't think they joined the Big Ten. That doesn't sound like they have an offer to do that. Like, who's going to join the Pac-12 now? Like, is that where we go? Or is everybody going to just start, the Big 12 is kind of dying on itself too with Texas and Oklahoma leaving. Are we really just moving into just two giant conferences and we're going to battle it out? And for me, that sucks because then, I'm a fan of the Arizona Wildcats, as are you. If we join just two giant conferences, well, that the parity there is going to suck and the visibility is going to suck. So I don't know. I'm not in love with the conference realignment that's going on and stuff like this because it really does hurt, by and large, a lot of teams.
Yeah, I'm like I'm 100% with you. So like obviously it starts and ends with Larry Scott. He killed the conference, and I will never be convinced of anything different. I'm going to give a shout out to at Dan Greenspan, who tweeted today, if you're wondering how we got here, Big Ten Network is running live coverage of this news while the Pac-12 Network shows volleyball replays.
Jesus.
And that was just so spot on that I don't have no idea who Dan Greenspan is in the world, but you're absolutely nailing it. Like, I mean, and I'm glad I didn't turn on the Pac-12 network to see, I mean, I'm sure that wouldn't have been fun to report on. We're losing teams and we had no idea. We were completely blindsided. We don't even talk to the 12 athletic directors in our program. That's too many people to keep up with.
I saw a tweet, just since you're on the tweet train, I saw a tweet where it said the Big 12 is broadcasting the news. So is the Pac-12 network, but nobody can see it because nobody can watch the Pac-12 network.
Also, exactly, perfectly accurate. I mean, so that's kind of 1A. And then I think the second piece that you mentioned is just like, I mean, I don't know if I should hope that we get gobbled up by, I don't even think it's realistic. I don't think the SEC or Big Ten really cares about some of these middling Pac schools. So I don't know. I don't know if I don't know if some of these schools just become like these basketball schools, or maybe they join up with the Big 12 and ACC. My only other hope is that Mark Titus also put out there that, hey, there is a potential that, ESPN kind of owns the SEC and Fox owns the Big Ten, and ultimately everybody ends up there. And then eventually Amazon buys both of those, then creates the new coalition of American football, like you reframes the NCAA and then divvies everybody back out again to where we like it. But I don't see anything that I like about this other than I still love college football. And the one thing I'll say that could be interesting about it is if we end up in a conference where, Arizona fans now have to travel to Baylor, Cincinnati, I don't know what. Like the idea of Maryland traveling to USC is hilarious to me. So I don't know. If you're looking at it from a purely comedic perspective, I'm sure the tweets will be lit since we're on the Twitter train. Like when you get these weird combinations of USC at Iowa, and then they find out, Iowa fans pull their pants down to their ankles to piss. Like that's a funny realization for USC fans. And I look forward to those tweets.
It just doesn't make any sense from both angles, right? Like we already went over the rest of the Pac-12, how it hinders them. But like we keep mentioning it too, like it doesn't really make a lot of sense for USC or UCLA either, because they're going to get curb stomped by the teams that are established in the Big Ten. Like, when Michigan comes down to USC, they're probably going to pummel USC. They're definitely going to curb stomp, UCLA. Ohio State's probably going to, piss all over both of those schools. Even Penn State could do it, right? And then, like, you look at the recruiting battles, like, I don't know. Now you're opening it up to the rest of the Big Ten, like to recruit in California or, Vegas or whatever, and be like, oh, well, look, like you're going to be playing in the same areas as like USC or UCLA. Why would you go there? So it just, to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then obviously, yeah, financially, right? Like I guess they will get a lot more TV money because the Big Ten is always on TV, but like the travel, like everything about this just stinks. And like, I don't understand it. It's exactly how like when Texas and Oklahoma moved to the SEC, they announced it last year. It made no sense for those teams either, because now Texas is going to go, get absolutely demolished by Alabama, by Georgia, by A&M again. Like Oklahoma, same thing. Like I just don't understand these conference realignments. Like we had parity for the most part. Now, granted, the SEC is the granddaddy of college football, and they're always going to be kind of like shown the most light. But at least we had some level of parity. Now it's just like, it's going to be really, really weird. And I don't know anybody that's really happy about this.
But picture this. Picture a 62-year-old lifelong Nebraska fan booking a suite at the DoubleTree and then having to leave at 6 a.m. so we can tailgate by 11:30 in LA traffic at UCLA.
Yeah.
And that's all you can get out of it. I have nothing else to offer you. I'm totally with you. Like this sucks. It just sucks for college football. It kind of ruins it. And the only thing I can think to do is just laugh at the awkwardness of UCLA Rutgers and USC Maryland. And of course, those are like the most comical ones because they added those late. But still, like just the idea of like Iowa fans like flooding into USC and just the culture shock. And that's the only thing I can take out of this that brings me any joy at all, because the rest of it I just hate. And you laid out why, but there's a million more reasons I just hate it, and I just don't want to go through it all. I hate it.
Legitimately, the only thing I could see happening is like the Big 12, like having a last gasp at like life and like inviting, Oregon, Arizona, ASU, Utah, Colorado to come over to their conference. Stanford becoming an independent because they're so pretentious anyway that they want to be like the Notre Dame of the world. I could see that happening, and then just like Oregon State and Washington State joining like the Mountain West or something. I don't know what's going to happen with this. Like it's so confusing, and there's really no foreseeable end with this. And I'm sure it's going to be something we're going to be talking about the next year, because this isn't supposed to go into effect until 2024. So I guess 2 years we'll be talking about it. But yeah, just an odd situation all around.
I mean, but you shouldn't feel bad about knowing about it, because neither did the Pac-12. So, they like these guys just, they have 12 schools to stay connected with. That's 12 presidents, 12 ADs. I mean, how many are we talking about? 36 people they have to be connected to at any given time, and they're completely blindsided by this? Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Wild. Super, super wild. Bad look for the Pac-12. But it's been bad looks for the Pac-12 for the last 10 years. So, hey, nothing new here.
So yeah, I'm hoping for like kind of this, Big East meets Big 12 meets Mountain West conglomeration, and it just becomes at least like that fun league that you watch at 9:00 at night. I mean, and you just, right? This Pac-12 after dark is always kind of haha. How much do you like it? What's action? I don't know. Maybe these worlds meet and we get like some awesome brand of football that's completely interesting, entertaining, and somewhat viable. But I think the reality is, outside of the exception of USC and UCLA that obviously jumped into one of the two bigger pools, everybody else is probably going to be very much out of that conversation. If you ever thought, which, probably wasn't realistic for a lot of schools anyways, but if you ever thought you had a chance at being in the, being a broker at the table and having a shot at the college playoff, probably not.
I will say this. I wouldn't hate if a lot of the Pac-12 schools went to the Big 12, because I would enjoy like playing Baylor, TCU, Iowa State. Like those are some good teams, year over year. And then for the basketball side of things, like playing Kansas every year would be fun. Playing Baylor every year would be fun. We had a great game in the tourney with TCU. So like joining the Big 12 wouldn't be the worst thing. So, if we go any which way, I would prefer that's the scenario that occurs.
Throw a random one out at you. How do you feel about, right, Bill Walton, to me, without question, the best color commentator in NCAA basketball, spends his entire time, in his version of Sea to Shining Sea, describing the Pac-12, right? Like when you're, in the beautiful Pacific Northwest of Washington, as the waves come crashing against the cliffs, and then you come all the way down to the desert, and he does his whole thing. And now, he's always talking about, these miserable flyover states. Thank God the Pac-12 doesn't. Now, what if he has to cover games, whether he's covering UCLA or Arizona, and then we stick him in Kansas?
Yeah.
I mean, for God's sakes, this man has spent his entire life trying to avoid Kansas. What have we done?
Well, that's the question, right? Now, I guess he technically can't follow UCLA, right? Because you said it earlier that that Fox owns the Big Ten, basically, right? Their viewing rights, and he's ESPN. Right. Can he even say the Conference of Champions anymore if we don't have UCLA or USC? Because
that's what I mean.
Yeah,
you're gonna have to learn new words.
All credibility lost on Bill's end.
This is tough for Bill. I think he should really be considered. I mean, he is, ride the Quasar, but I mean, I think we're asking too much. This Quasar seems a little too steep.
Yeah, man. If poor Bill Walton, and I love Bill Walton to death, and if he can't make his way up to Oregon and enjoy his, hippie compounds and, go to LA and see the beaches and then come down to the desert and, get his energies right in Sedona, like he's going to be lost, man. He might just have to hang him up and retire.
Yeah, we're gonna send him into a non-weed legal Texas state 4 to 8 times a year. Not cool, man. Not cool.
That's Larry Scott's biggest like, failure is just ruining Bill Walton's career.
Correct, right? There's so many layers to this. I don't even know what I'm upset about most yet. I'm just beginning to dig into my feelings about how dark this situation is.
Yeah, screw you, Larry Scott. If for anything, for ruining Bill Walton's Conference of Champions.
I know, and the worst part is I know for sure he's on a yacht right now, and like he's the only one who does have Pac-12 Network.
Yeah, man. Oh well. Well, other things happening in the sports world, we'll go over them super, super quick. Obviously, we don't want to, we're not big hockey guys on this podcast, but shout out to the Avalanche. They did win the Stanley Cup, and they did it in convincing fashion, destroying the Tampa Bay Lightning. Really looked strong the entire playoffs. So congrats to you guys. I don't have a whole lot of talking points on the Stanley Cup because I'm not a hockey guy. But I would be, it would be terrible not to give them a shout out. So shout out to you guys.
Yeah. Congrats to the Avs. Lightning had won 2 in a row. So, maybe there's a bit of a passing of the torch there. Maybe the Avalanche are the new, which by the way, their colors are terrible and the name's kind of stupid, but whatever.
There is no worse team name in all of sportsdom than the Nashville Predators. Like your team name is literally like something that is frowned upon in almost every single language, a predator. So, hockey doesn't have a whole lot going for it in terms of naming rights. But it is a cool story. Like you mentioned it, right? Tampa Bay had won 2 in a row, looked like they were about to do the three-peat, which never really happens in sports. So, congrats to the Avs for at least preventing that. I don't have a whole lot more to say about this. Do you, John?
No, they played on ice. And if you want to drink it in a Coors Light, apparently you can. I don't know how that works, that they shovel the ice. And that seems like the biggest game in the world, right?
Yeah.
Like, do we really believe that happens?
For sure. And then moving on to baseball, we did want to highlight, obviously, Freddie Freeman came back to Atlanta this past week, had shed some tears for obvious reasons. He was the face of the franchise forever, won them a championship. Now he's off into LA. Got a bag on probably, arguably the best team in baseball. But you do have to feel for the guy. It's never easy coming back to the place that kind of raised you and you raised it to just complete highs. Myself being a Braves fan, it was definitely emotional seeing Freddie back on the diamond. One thing I did want to point out, and I was talking to John about it before the podcast, but I think it's wild that he fired his agent after coming to Atlanta because he found out that his agent didn't tell him about the contract offer that the Braves had put out there for Freddie, and wanted him to get the bigger bag in LA. Just a real scumbag move by that agent. And, I don't.
You're like team agent. Your team agent on this, or your team Freddie on this for sure? Like all the way. There's no room for like maybe Teddy mess this up.
Teddy's not even the owner anymore. So like, no.
No, I'm sorry. Freddie. Sorry. Excuse me. Sorry. I don't know why I brought Ted Turner into it.
Because
Freddie, like, Freddie, like in some way, like is ultimately responsible for kind of screwing this up.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you rebuff, numerous contract extensions, and granted, Liberty Media Group did not give him a fair contract offer for many, many a time. But if you're an agent and you get an offer from a guy's team that he spent his entire career with and you don't even present it to him, like that is kind of a shit move. And like, he deserves to get fired in my book.
Yeah, I think it's fine that he fired him. I think Freddie kind of has to like wear at least a small piece in this where it's like, he's super emotional about it. It seems like he's kind of annoying his teammates with it. They're like, okay, we get it, but like you're one of the highest paid players in the league. Like it really isn't much to be crying about. And then I'll secondarily rebuke the claim that though I do believe Atlanta may have raised Freddie in many ways. I don't know that Freddie raised Atlanta. After Sherman, I believe all credit goes to the Atlanta Braves 1990s starting pitching staff.
Wow, throwing out Sherman out there. Good job, history buff here. Okay, hey,
I feel like I nailed that one.
Bravo. I'll give you that one. No, but like, look, yeah, you can sit here and say the '90s Braves. They absolutely did, and so did TBS. Like Ted Turner, like turned the Braves into turned the Braves into a national icon. You have people in frickin' Idaho that are Braves fans simply because when they were a 6-year-old and they turned on TBS, like the Braves were playing. Like, sure, but I've been a Braves fan my whole life, and like there was a good span of time there where they were absolutely atrocious to watch, and he stuck with them through and through, and got them to the promised land. Like, he definitely did raise them out of some bad times. So I don't want to take away from him. I get what you're saying, but there's a reason why the guy was emotional. He definitely, put in the blood and the tears to get that team to where it was last year, and is definitely like a staple of Atlanta baseball. I think he deserved to finish his career there. So for the agent to kind of like mess that up, it just sucks for him, sucks for the franchise, sucks for his family. So I know they were really invested into Atlanta sports, but the story's written how it's written. I wish him the best of luck in LA until the playoffs. The Braves are on an absolute heater right now. They're one of the hottest teams in baseball. Mets fans are crying in the streets of Queens, and I love nothing more than that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I do feel for Freddie, and I'm pro Mill crying even if it's on the field of play. I know Tom Hanks famously said there's no crying in baseball, but I digress. If you must cry, Freddie, cry. But it's just been baseball is interesting these days. The stuff that makes it through, to the cutting floor, if you will, is really interesting because it's always the bat flip, the guy crying, the this, that. Like the stories that show up are so weird, and it's probably why we spent an hour talking about the NBA and 5 minutes on baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very well versed on this podcast about our affinity for baseball. So
yeah.
It is what it is. John, I did just send you something on Twitter. Speaking of college football, the Big Ten did extend an invite to Notre Dame. So maybe our hopes of Stanford becoming an independent are lost already, but who knows? I know Notre Dame famously, for some godforsaken reason, loves to be an independent and play BYU and Navy every year. But who knows? Maybe they'll start playing some real teams going forward.
Yeah, I can't think of one thing in history that would want to keep, the Catholics from having people look at their books. So it's interesting.
Wow, what a zinger there.
Hey, we did it to you what you want. I'm just throwing things out there.
We're throwing shit at walls and seeing what sticks.
Yeah.
So
do you take it how you want to take it?
Yeah, perfect. Well, hey man, like we've been saying this whole podcast, the next 24 to 48 hours are going to be absolutely bananas in the NBA world. Well, I'm sure more stuff from the NCAA is going to start peeking its head out as well. Even just on this podcast, as we're recording, the Notre Dame thing came out. So guys, stay tuned. Even though we had a brief pause in the action last week, we will be getting a podcast out to you next weekend. So please subscribe, please like, please share, comment, whatever. We appreciate it all. It really helps the algorithms, helps grow the podcast, which we love, gives our ladies a little bit more credibility as why their significant others are spending 2 hours on a Thursday night, Wednesday night, what have you, recording a damn podcast. So please do us that favor. Hit us up on socials. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook, all the major ones. So please, like and subscribe there as well. Interact with us. And please give us any kind of ideas that you would love to hear on the podcast. We will have that top sports video game list out next week. Maybe we'll sprinkle in another list. Who knows? We'll see what happens. It just depends on how wild the NBA gets this next week, which chances are we'll probably have another hour-long podcast. Maybe even just devoted to Kevin Durant. Who knows? As you can tell, we spent half the podcast talking strictly about the man from Baltimore himself this week. So we will see what happens. NFL is starting to chug along. So we'll probably have some news on that. Maybe Deshaun Watson news. His trial did end today. So the news will be coming out here pretty soon. What is going to happen with that? If it's a year-long suspension or maybe longer, Lord knows Baker's not going to have any part of it. So please stay tuned. John, do you have any parting words?
No, I probably said enough. But it's I really do feel like I think if we touched on everything we wanted to touch on today, and I think it's gonna be more NBA news. The college football dominoes will continue to fall. We'll continue to talk about all of those things and dip into some pop culture for kicks and see if baseball doesn't spring up and bubble up to the forefront and see what else shows up. So if it's topical, if you're talking about it, if you're thinking about it, if you're buzzing about it, I'm sure it'll show up here. So let us know.
Perfect. All right, guys. We look forward to bringing it back to you next week. Until then, enjoy your 4th of July weekend and stay safe this weekend. Don't do anything that Jason Pierre-Paul wouldn't do. So thanks. Have a great weekend. Bye.